once a young prince whose father, the king, decided it was time for the prince to begin his reign. So the king took him up high into the mountains to a sacred place named Sorrow. Then the mighty king took off his crown and hurled it halfway across the world, saying, "You may choose the form of any living thing in the kingdom on your quest. When you return with your crown, you will be ready to be king." Anxious and impatient, the prince chooses the strongest creature he can think of and sets off, charging through the awful forest as a rhinoceros. He tramples plants, scatters birds, knocks over trees, and in his haste charges right off a very high cliff. Too entangled in the vines to plummet, and too afraid to move, the prince closes his eyes, and to his astonishment hears a still, small voice. "Look at this forest, young one. Do the animals destroy the vines in picking their grapes? Do the vines strangle the trees to reach the sunlight?" After meditating on these things, the prince says to himself, "I know what I shall do." As a chimpanzee, he uses the vines and the trees to swing and jump through the forest, even riding the backs of the majestic elephants across the great and vast landscape. Thank you.